Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for Monday the 20th of April. And joining me on this edition, Steve Withers.
How's it going, Royal Ugly Dudes?
Kaz Harlow.
Our first guest speaker comes from the year 400 BC.
Ed Selley.
So, Bill, what you're telling me essentially is that Napoleon was a short, dead dude.
And special guest, Paul Gray.
Way to go, Egghead.
Welcome back to the podcast. As always, we'll start the podcast by once again thanking our frontline workers at this moment in time. I was in the supermarket the other day. It was towards the end of the day. It was about half an hour till closing, so it was pretty much empty. And I went to the first checkout to be served and so on. So I had to walk the line of the other checkouts here, and I made sure I thanked everybody as I was going out, because none of them had protective gear on or anything like that, and they're having to serve customers and all the rest of it. And like we said last week, they have to go to work to keep the wheels turning. So thank you to those on the front line.
Have they not got the Perspex screen things?
Yes. So the Perspex, and it was all contactless and that kind of thing. So, but they still have to scan the stuff through and so on. So, but again, I was keeping myself going in for half an hour. They're there the whole day. And they have to be there the whole day. So, yeah, thank you very much, frontline workers, and of course the NHS and everybody else who are working incredibly hard at the minute. It is appreciated, and well done to Captain Tom. What a fantastic result! I mean, obviously, I think people were just waiting on something to support, but what a great gentleman to support. A real hero. I mean, somebody who has done his bit for his country throughout his lifetime, so well done to him as well.
I think they should promote him so he can be Major Tom.
Yeah, but that's only
that's just because you want to do a Bowie gag.
Reference.
There's
no other. So transparent, Steve.
Yeah, you're so easy to read, Steve. You really are.
But fair enough. And also, obviously, the ongoing clap for people on Thursdays is becoming a sort of arms race now. We've got, letting explosives off in support of our care workers. Someone was donutting the Woolwich Ferry in support of care workers. As someone pointed out, it now seems to a little bit be do what you've always wanted to do but not been allowed to until this point in support of care workers. But it's all very stirring. It must be said that Thursday 8 p.m. round here is now extremely loud, especially since the M1 Emergency Recovery Company, which is only half a mile from here, sets all their vehicles off on a slow loop, and one of them appears to have a train horn attached to it. So yeah, you know all about it. It's quite something.
There we go. So I should introduce Paul before we go any further. Now, long-term listeners, we feel for you. You will have heard Paul at some point. I think it was maybe a year and a half ago. It was definitely after a Philips launch event. So they tend to be January, don't they? So I think it wasn't this January, it was last January, I think, you were on the podcast. Now, you did work for IHS Market. I believe you're still working in the same field, but it's a different company now.
Yeah, that's right. So the IHS Market changed and sold various businesses last year. So I carry on in the same team, researching TVs and the display business. And my new masters are Informa Media, which is a British company. And they run that business under the brand of Omdia, which is all the things that we've done in the past in terms of researching displays, consumer electronics, and media consumption.
And it's mainly business to business that you do, isn't it?
That's correct. Yeah. So what we really focus on is the supply chain. We're not really into retail tracking, but everything in the industry, from people who melt sand into glass all the way through that glass being processed into LCD and OLED panels, and then ending up being manufactured and as finished products. And we track the shipments of those.
Okay, so welcome to the podcast, Paul. We're going to get into this in quite some detail in the hardware section, but it's always good to have a guest, and I'm glad that you're going to hang around for the whole podcast, so looking forward to your opinions on the latest film releases as well. We've got Star Wars collection coming out this week, which should be we're all waiting for. Well, I'm not, but I know some people will be. Kaz, what have you been up to?
What have I been up to this week? It's been just crazy busy with work, I think, this week. I don't have much to report. Maybe planted some potatoes. And
disaster preparation, I like that.
Yeah, I know. I mean, We already had a first batch of vegetables going in the garden. It gets like that when you have to resort to doing gardening. You know that things are getting bad. But yeah, it's just been chocker at work. I guess because everyone's feeling this. Everyone's wondering, well, at what point things are going to change and how long we have to hold on for. So yeah, exactly. So yes, it's been very all hands on deck, and
that's obviously your proper work, not your reviewing.
yeah. Although reviewing, that's pretty busy. Yes, but yes.
Okay, Steve, you haven't been doing much work. I understand.
No. I've been trying to, but I've struggled to. It took me a long time to write one review this week, basically. But I've also spent a lot of it working my way through all the Marvel movies. So I've just finished phase 2.
Yeah, you're honest. And Ed was honest as well, saying that he sat staring at a blank Word document for numerous hours this week. It does seem to be a bit strange. I mean, I think we mentioned it last week that you would think that for us, not a lot has changed. We all work from home and so on, but you would think that would be really quite productive, and that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to be less productive for some strange reason.
It's the existential angst. You could dress it up. There's fundamentally a level of existential angst to things, and things are abnormal. And even if you pretend, because our own personal circumstances have not changed drastically, that things are the same, they are patently not, and your own consciousness creeps into these sort of things. So there's nothing you can do about it. And I say that as someone who, I've got methods. I switch over to working on my iPad Pro because you can't just tab out and dick about on social media. It's a case of swipe. You have to swipe up and physically start another app. So when I'm really stuck for concentration, I do that, and then I listen to records. But no, even that doesn't completely solve it. So you've got to go with your revised work output and just calculate to that, basically.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of irony at the minute as well. I mean, petrol at its cheapest it has been for a long time while we're in lockdown. We were actually supposed, as the car group this week, we were supposed to be on the Wallace and Gromit run, which was a run down to Yorkshire. Is it Wensleydale? We're supposed to go down that. Yeah, that's why we called it the Wallace and Gromit run. We're supposed to go in that, and the weather's been beautiful today as well. And of course, we couldn't do any of that. And the weather's beautiful, and petrol's dirt cheap, and we're sat at home looking out the window at the car sat outside. It's like, yeah. If there hadn't been a lockdown, it'd have been chucking down rain.
Yeah.
You just know that it was going to be the case, didn't you? So, I think we've been round everybody, haven't we?
No.
Yes.
No, me.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
I mean, obviously you don't care, but you could at least pretend. No, I mean, obviously, like you've been stuck in the house. I have got some work done. I've changed over loads of equipment from one batch of review things to another. I have obviously I bought a PlayStation 4 to entertain my son during this extended period of inactivity. For my sins, I bought the Gran Turismo Sport or whatever it was on offer on the PlayStation Store. And for the most part, it's dreadful. I don't want to get into why it's dreadful, but they've messed about with some of the fundamentals of the game. But I found it hilarious that lots of the cars, it's all fully configured and online these days. What amuses me is that there is a gentleman somewhere in France who has very carefully and painstakingly created the John Player Special logo livery from the 70s and 80s Formula One cars and stuck it on everything in a sort of magnificent two-fingered salute to political correctness. And it would appear, looking through some of the back comments, that someone had also managed to do a complete applicable livery using the Pornhub logo as well, but the site has closed that one down, which is a bit of a shame. But you can still ignore modern sponsorship regulations and adorn all your cars in cigarette and alcohol sponsorship, which in these times you've got to find your pleasures where you can find them, and I just think that's quite hilarious. So I salute that person entirely. It's very, very good.
Any new music discoveries this week for you, Ed? Or have you just been going through your old stuff?
No. there was something I missed last month, and it's a band with a stupid name, but they're very, very good, from Manchester, called the Slow Readers Club. They actually released an album which I managed to completely miss when it launched a couple of weeks ago, but it's called The Joy of the Return. It's channels a bit of Joy Division, Interpol, bit of shoegaze, but that's a damn good listen. So if you need to fill 35 minutes of your life, well worth a look. Give that a whirl.
Okay, there you go. Don't say we're not full of useful information, I think is the phrase I'm looking for there. Right, cars competitions.
Yes, so we can currently win a copy of 21 Bridges on Blu-ray. That closes 6th of May, my birthday. Win a copy of Preacher: The Final Season on Blu-ray. Also closes 6th of May. Getting a pattern here. Win a copy of Elephant Man on limited edition 4K Blu-ray. That closes 13th of May. Win copies of Criterion's May titles on Blu-ray. That closes 19th of May. And win a Yamaha Yaz 109 simple all-in-one soundbar. That closes 21st of May.
Yaz, the only way is up, eh? You going anywhere nice on your birthday, Kaz?
Yeah, maybe in the garden.
And previous competition winners?
Yeah, we have got some. I ordered some stamps online. So Replicant 81 won a copy of Syncopation on Blu-ray. Night 76 won a copy of Long Day's Journey into Night on Blu-ray. And Krish won the entire March Criterion bundle on Blu-ray and was absolutely chuffed to bits.
Good. Excellent. I'm glad. Well done to our competition winners. And plenty of competitions up there. I thought they were going to dry up completely, but we still seem to be managing to get our hands on some pretty nice prizes there, Kaz.
Yeah, Sony and Criterion are being very helpful. Their warehouse, which ships out all of the competitions, has been, even under these circumstances, working, albeit undermanned. And so we're still getting a lot of the Sony releases, and Sony in the UK do the Criterion releases. So they've been pretty good.
Excellent. Good stuff. Right, we'll be back in a sec with some hardware. Okay, so moving on to hardware news, and like I say, we've got a special guest tonight. Paul Gray is with us, and obviously, Paul, you work as an analyst in the industry that we talk about every week, which is obviously TVs and so on. And we just so happen to find ourselves in something of a complete unpredictable phase that we've never seen before. We've never seen anything like what's going on at the minute. So I imagine that it's having some serious effects on the business at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely, Phil. I mean, this is a black swan event by anybody's definition, and it's really fun to have this to track and as a problem to try and solve and think about. That's right. So what we've got is two things going on at the same time, and normally you only get one of the two, and that is we've got a supply shock. So a lot of the value chain and the supply chain has things that are either made in China or processed in China. And then at the same time, of course, we've got a demand shock that means that people can't go out and live their lives as normal. They can't get paid. They may or may not be in work, and they may or may not be able to go to the shops. And of course, people are now cooped up at home. And so can't do the things and spend the money on the things that they probably intended to for this year. So it's a really interesting pattern between the two. So let's start off with what's happened in China, which was, of course, there was the lockdown in the Wuhan area, which then spread to other provinces. Wuhan happens to be a display hub in China. So there were a couple of critical LCD fabs that were shut down as a result, and also lots of people who supply those. And then, of course, moving on, there have been issues now, of course, with the lockdown in Europe, that people can't live their lives as normal, and demand falls simply because retailing activity also stops. What is odd, of course, is that what you think is going to happen is not necessarily what happens when you think a little deeper. So people have choices, and that if you're not going to go out in the evening to the pub or to a restaurant or to a movie, then suddenly TV has greater value for you. And so people are actually, before they're going to lockdown, we see these little spikes in the TV market, and also obviously things for working at home like notebook PCs and monitors and PC peripherals. And then, of course, you then take the hit, and the other activity then dries up. And we think that in the second quarter of the year, then the TV market in Europe is going to fall something like 40% for both supply and demand reasons.
So what time period would that be over that 40% decrease?
That 40% will be compared to last year, and that will be probably for 3 months, so April, May, June. So, yeah, it's an interesting one that really that on the one hand, people have less money. On the other hand, TV becomes a more valuable thing to have, and TV is a cheap entertainment. And the TV purchases in Europe have not been at all linked to the economy over the past 20 years. It's always a joke that when somebody loses their job, the first thing they do is buy a crate of beer, and the second one is a new TV, because TV is a cheap entertainment and they know they're going to be at home for a long time. As an example, the record year for TV sales in Spain was 2009, when unemployment went to 25%, because TV is a cheap entertainment, and people may not have the money to spend on other things, but TV fills the gap very, very well. There are certainly disruptions to the supply side. So on a simple one, we know that manufacturers got very short of remote controls, and container ship sailings from China to Europe, many of them were cancelled because there weren't the containers to load and fill the ships up. Many other ships are now steaming more slowly because there's no urgency for them to land their cargoes, and it also makes the ships more economical. So I think what we will have is the first stage of shock, which we've gone through. We will then go to a second one where things start to wake up, and we get a whole load of problems in the supply chain, because it's a bit like after a railway strike that all the trains are in the wrong place, and in the same way that all the materials will be in the wrong place. Now, thinking ahead further on, of course, what we should have had this year about now would have been the beginning of the peak promotional time for TVs for the Euro 20 championships, and then moving on to the Olympics. And people tend to do that with the older models, so the 2019 models. So people have bought all the parts for those. They're somewhere in the supply chain. And probably with the way that finances are going to go later this year, nobody wants to write off hundreds of thousands of TVs worth of components. So when people do their model changes is going to be an interesting question. So when will the 2020 models come out in full force? Will that be in the middle of the summer, or maybe it'll be as late as September or October? Obviously, the models have been announced, but it's when we'll see them in large numbers in the shops. And maybe some brands will just say, actually, they'll do a hop and a skip, and rather than take the 2020 models and replace them with 21 models, instead they'll run them on for 18 months. And so I think what we'll see is that the product pipeline longer term, even a year out, will be disrupted. Companies obviously have had similar problems with people being unable to move around, unable to work in labs and travel and so on. So I think that the development pipeline is also being disrupted, and that may slow things down. So we may see some very odd things in the next couple of years in terms of product launches, as everybody struggles with this productivity gap that they've got, and also getting all the inventory out of the system.
Paul, we were discussing it last week. Normally, the way the year works, like you say, the TV launches are roundabout now. The major models. So there's two different sectors of the market. So you have your affordable mass-produced area, and then you have your more higher-end models,
Right.
Which are the ones that we tend to focus on in AVForums. So you have your lower down the range models. They start to hit the market round about February, March, April, and then you have the top-end premium sets coming in round about May, June. They were going to be a little bit earlier this year because of the Euros and so on. Then you have, in Europe, you have the second part of the year, which is normally launched at IFA.
Right.
So if companies like Samsung and LG and Panasonic and so on, they normally have something to announce at IFA, which is normally the first week in September. And then from September, you then have CES in January. And what we were discussing and being honest with ourselves and looking at where we're going to be come CES, is there even going to be a CES? There's certainly not going to be an IFA, because you just can't have that. And it's a public show as well, IFA. It's not just a trade show. So we're suggesting that that's not going to happen. And I don't think CES is like it happened either. Are you going to have 170,000 people, which is the normal attendance, turning up in one city and all flying in from all over the world? We don't think that's going to happen. So it's interesting that you're suggesting that perhaps the industry will look at running these models for 18 months, because if you look at it, that seems to be the most logical way of approaching it.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's made the decision yet. And just for the IFA one, I believe that the German government has already said that nobody can run any large events until the end of August. So IFA could technically squeak through. I do agree with you that I think it's brave to make that decision early on, and we'll see what happens. I think that people will come round to this idea and make that hard decision a little later on in the year. But to my mind, that's what has to happen. The promotional calendar gets very, very messy. So, of course, 2021, we now have sports events when we wouldn't expect them. 2022, the World Cup is in November, of course. So you have this great big gap in the year all the way through the first half of 2022. And then 2023, then normally people have a quiet time after the promotional season, and inventory adjustments and things like that. And this time it's going to be right slamming into model transitions. So it's going to be a really bumpy 3 years. And I think that the whole product cycle is going to be far more independent between brands, far more surprises, and it'll be very interesting to see what happens. But I'm with you that I think that reality will dawn, that people just have to cancel the next model round because they just won't be ready, or a supplier won't be ready, or something will get stuck, or they've just got a lot of inventory to move.
Paul, just whilst I remember, the remote control thing you mentioned there, is that a Wuhan issue?
It was, that's right, yeah.
And do you know, I mean, that takes you sort of outside, I mean, is that presumably applies to a vast swathe of consumer electronics rather than just televisions?
To be honest, I don't know the exact details. I do know that there were problems with remote controls from a supplier in Wuhan. Exactly who and which models, of course, so which brands, which models, then gets very, very messy. But that was one good example of something where you saw a direct result of that lockdown. What we understand in China at the moment is that things are something like 75 to 80% back to normal for factories, with, again, some strong regional differences. So the Shenzhen area, for example, seems to be back to normal. Likewise, Shanghai. Certain other areas, like around Chengdu, seem to be having a little bit more delays. So depending on where your suppliers are, there are some geographic differences in China, which isn't that surprising, because it's, like the difference between Spain and Poland in terms of distance in China.
No, absolutely. I mean, we've seen that over the years with just extreme weather events and other weirdness as well.
Yeah,
Knocking
absolutely.
random factories out of the equation, and it's always amazing because factory A, who you've never heard of, will have an issue. Normally much more localized than this, and you think, well, okay, well, that's fine, but I've never heard of factory A, so I'm sure it has no bearing on anyone that I'm involved in. And then before you know it, parts X, Y, and Z, which have just fed in reliably for the last 15 years without you paying any attention, suddenly cease and all hell breaks loose. So yeah, I can appreciate the snap effect on these sort of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to give an example, when there was the earthquake and tsunami in Japan, then one factory that was totally trashed was a factory that made conductive self-adhesive tape. So what? Well, that's what you connect up on the side of every sheet of glass on an LCD panel. And there were only 2 people in the world who could make conductive self-adhesive tape. And, people had fingers crossed, which is, are we in supplier A or supplier B? But that's the sort of thing that the industry is so optimized now that, the butterfly's wing flapping in one side of the world really does have a big effect on the other side of the world. And the supply chain up until now has been designed for efficiency. It's been designed for the past 20 years to squeeze cost out. And of course, as consumers, we've benefited from that. But the supply chain, as you say, is vulnerable to the factory you've never heard in a city that you've only ever seen once on a piece of paper, or maybe never even heard of. And suddenly everybody's affected because it's been optimized down to this one super efficient supplier.
Welcome to the future. Evening dress option.
Absolutely. It's going to be a very interesting one when you start to think about risk. And this risk prevention has a cost. So longer term, I think we can expect that companies will become more risk averse. And as a result, it will also probably cost us more in the shops. And, I'm not sure that things are better or worse as a result. They're just different.
Is this a game changer, Paul, in your opinion? Are we going to see our market, the TV market, fundamentally change because of this?
I think there are a couple of things that are the second and third stage effects. So every time the industry has had a crisis in the past 10 or 15 years, then there's been a round of consolidation. The old joke about when the tide goes out, you discover the people who've been swimming naked, and that companies with weak finances will run into trouble and will get mopped up by companies that have strong finances. So I think that we will see that. I think that for some brands, then ones who've been hovering on the edge of the market, do they stay in? Do they exit? Do they expand? Do they call it a day? Those sort of decisions suddenly get clarified, and there's a sense of urgency to them. So I think that we will see both those things happening next. So a round of consolidation, a round of exits. And so, yes, very much we have a day zero effect when suddenly from now on everything is different.
Are we seeing the end of the luxury good market for a few years as well? Because, like you say, it's not just people in the industry who are reassessing what's important to them and their business and so on. But I'm sure people's attitudes towards certain things, like a luxury goods, like a luxury TV, that's going to change because their circumstances everybody's circumstances have changed in some way.
Yes, no. I think one of the surprising ones is that going back over the TV industry, and I've gone all the way back to 1980 in terms of the data, that the TV industry runs on a technology cycle. And if you provide something that really captures consumers' imagination, then they will latch onto it. Remember that in the UK, our CRT to flat transition happened really in the teeth of that Lehman crisis and recession and run on banks in 2008, 2009, and the aftermath in 2010. And the market went completely mad, because suddenly we got something for consumers that they thought was absolutely fantastic, which was a flat panel TV. And the pricing was accessible. And okay, maybe people didn't go on such lavish holidays. Maybe they didn't replace the car, but they bought a nice TV. And these things are cheap. Yeah. I was having a look the other day. Believe it or not, that you can buy 32-inch TVs in Spain on promotion last week for €93, including VAT. So if you haven't gone out and filled your car up with 2 tanks of petrol, then that's the cost of a 32-inch TV. Yeah. If you're not going to go on your summer holiday this year, that's £1,000, and you can buy yourself a nice OLED TV, possibly. Yeah, if it's on promo. So, I think that consumers have choices, and while on the one hand they have less money, on the other hand they may just choose to redirect their spending. Maybe they don't move house, maybe they don't put in a new kitchen, but those things are very, very expensive by comparison with TVs, and TVs are cheap.
So it sucks to be EasyJet, but not necessarily LG.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Who are going to be the true competitors for the TV market? Then maybe it's Thomson Holidays and things like that at the moment. Maybe it's replacing the car. Maybe it's all those things. Maybe it's people just feel uncomfortable about going out for the rest of the year for obvious reasons, and say, okay, I won't eat in restaurants. And as a result of 10 weekends not eating in restaurants, suddenly you can buy yourself a very nice 75-inch TV. Yeah. Consumers have choices, I think, is really what I'd say, and those choices are sensible and rational. And just because there's difficult times doesn't mean that people stop spending money on anything. And when the going gets tough, the rich get spending.
Is there any? I mean, obviously this takes us out of supply line and into retail trends, but obviously under these circumstances, depending on how the economy behaves after the event, you do see a drying up of some of the better credit deals. Now, right, that drives very large item spending in both our category and others. I mean, is there data for? I mean, because it dried up significantly, as you point out in the time you were describing, 2008 to 2010. Yeah. Did it have it must have had an effect after a fashion.
Yeah, I think it's very true to say that while the TV market in absolute units tends to be very, very resilient, in terms of value, then people say, do I really need to buy the best one that I can afford, or am I just going to keep a bit of money back? So that's the case. And as you say, people get much more nervous about credit risk. And brands have the same problem. Brands have exactly the same issue with getting credit insurance for retailers. So they can often want to do a deal with a retailer, and they will only have a credit line of so much that they can get insurance for. As a result of that, the bigger brands that have very large corporate finances often do well. So I think in this case, it plays towards the advantage of Samsung and LG as an example, because they have very, very large parent companies who can probably absorb that credit risk and allow them to be more aggressive.
And who are resident in a country which is also showing reasonable signs of immediate recovery in its own terms.
Right. But even so, if you just saw the news earlier on that Samsung and LG have basically said, we're going to take this moment to leave LCD manufacturing entirely in terms of the panels, not in terms of the TVs, but in terms of panels, they saw that as being a game changer, as you rightly described the situation, and that hastened that decision for them. So we will see that the best companies being decisive, being aggressive when they need to be aggressive, and being very defensive at other times.
I think Paul's absolutely right. People are going to take an opportunity cost decision here, which is they're not going to go on holiday, probably. I mean, normal life isn't going to return to normal for at least a year, maybe a year and a half, possibly. Right. It could be longer. In that time period, you're probably not going to be inclined to go on holiday, because that involves getting on a plane. You might not be able to do that. You might be able to get into the country you want to go to. If you book it, you might find suddenly you can't go. I think the risk involved is too great, so you won't do that. You won't. Probably not the best time to move house as well, I would have suggested. I think most people are going to stay put, and they're not going to go on holiday. But the one thing they can probably guarantee at this point is that at some point in the next year, we're going to be in lockdown again. So I think what they'll do is they'll invest their money, what spare cash they have got, and I think also savings are going to go through the roof over the next few months. People are going to start saving a lot more money than they used to for a rainy day. And but if they have got some spare cash, they'll spend it on the house because they're going to be in it a lot. And one of the things, as Paul's pointed out, they're going to spend the money on is a TV because that is the dominant entertainment, method of entertainment.
Yeah, and we're not
stuck at home.
And you're not talking about high-end TVs here.
No, mid-range is going to go. I think mid-range is going to be huge, not high-end necessarily, but the mid-range is going to be very popular. I think £1,000 OLEDs are going to fly off the shelves, in my view.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that one, Steve. In terms of R&D, you have to assume that companies have to keep that going, Paul. Otherwise, they get too far behind. But if you're talking about perhaps decisions being made that they're going to delay bringing in new models for 18 months and so on, I suppose it could go one or two ways, couldn't it, really, in terms of R&D?
Yeah, I think it's again comes back to whether companies can absorb that cost or not. And probably some will say this is an opportunity if our competition are going to slow down for us to accelerate. In reality, I think that specifically for TV and AV products, then actually the pace of R&D has slowed down in the last 5 years, and we're moving back towards a 2-year heartbeat that we used to have, say, 15 years ago. And that's simply because most of the big problems have been solved at the moment, and the next round of problems look so difficult that they need rather more time to fix them. And I'm thinking about 8K as an example on that one, where it's not just about solving the problem of making 8K TV. You've actually got to solve the problem of delivering it to somebody's house, which means people digging lots of fiber into the ground and so on. So I think what we will see again is that the strong look very, very good, and the weak and the ones with less finances begin to struggle on this one. But there has to be some other ways of doing this, and I think one of the other ways that we may see, which is quite cheap, is a focus again on styling and design. So you keep the electronics and the software, which is the really expensive stuff, the same. But we see people being more and more creative on form factor. And of course, that's something we've seen for the last couple of years, that there's a lot more attention to TV as furniture and the form factor and those sort of aspects that we compared to, say, 10 years ago.
I wonder if, you don't have to name names here, obviously, Paul, but the TV market was competitive before this happened, and there were a few companies, a few have fallen by the wayside already over the last few years. I should imagine we're going to see some more casualties, possibly, although I suppose there are only 5 or 6.
So many to
There's only a few left now, isn't there? But I'm wondering whether we will see a casualty, given that there is a finite demand and times are difficult.
Yeah, I think that a couple of examples to think about is that, first of all, we've got 6 or 8 Chinese brands that have been sniffing around Europe looking more and more aggressive. Probably some of those will decide that that it's not worth the money to try and invest further into the TV market. So that will clarify the give up trying or don't really bother type decisions, especially for ones playing round the edge. So I think we'll see a thinning out of the companies that are trying to break their way into Europe, and a couple who've got the strategic patience and the resources will continue to tackle that. I think companies that have got low shares in Europe, say below 5%, have to look again and say, is this tenable and is this long-term a position that's really going anywhere, or will they always be on the back foot? The other thing that interests me is whether we see that because retailing has also been so disrupted, that companies that have strength or bias into certain kind of retailers may discover that they're disadvantaged. So as an example, if your retail partner has a strong internet presence, then you're probably doing okay at the moment. If you're in very much retailers with bricks and mortar stores, then you've got a problem. And while all retailers are rushing to improve their internet presence, then the ones who execute on that and their brand partners, CE brand partners, will do very well. So I think the importance of the channel is going to be much, much bigger in determining winners and losers. As you say, when we go into several more rounds potentially of contraction, expansion and lockdowns and so on, then I think retailing really becomes the differentiator now, and it's not going to be just about price, but about fulfillment.
It all seems profoundly depressing, but there you go.
I don't know if it's depressing or not. I think it's just that the world suddenly got more complicated, and that much of the industry has been driven just by price and cheap. And suddenly there are a whole load of other things and complexities that really become important. And
I innately dislike complexity, Paul. That's why I do record players.
I think what it has done is it's highlighted something that's always been there, but we've taken for granted and never thought about, which is supply chains.
Right.
Which is what I was talking about this last week with relation to toilet roll. But it's the same with food. A lot of farmers are currently ploughing over fields of food because they cannot sell it because they sell to restaurants. And
right.
Restaurants ain't buying food. And it's a completely different supply chain to the one that supplies food to supermarkets. They're different packaging, different sizes, different weights, different supply chains entirely. And changing from one to the other is very expensive. And if we're going to, if this is only going to last a few more weeks, there's no point investing that money in new equipment if you're not going to need it again in a few weeks' time. And so the option then is just literally to pour milk down and literally pouring milk down drains or ploughing over fields of food, which is and that's the same in any industry, isn't it? There is a just-in-time supply chain, and if that gets disrupted even a little bit, the implications like dropping a stone into water, isn't it? And the ripples go out across the lake.
Absolutely, and there's some interesting ones. So, for example, as we've talked in the past about more and more LCD fabs being built in China. Well, the engineers who actually know how to run those fabs are Korean and Japanese, and they've had to stay at home for the last 3 months. Along with the suppliers of the equipment, who are companies like Nikon. And another company in Sweden makes a lot of the equipment for LCD panel fabs. So the engineers have not been visiting and commissioning this kit, along with also the other contractors. So we're actually going to see a delay in some of these new fabs coming on stream, unsurprisingly. And so one of the really paradoxical things that comes out of all this risk and the supply chain stacking up is that suddenly later on this year we could actually end up in a situation going on into next year as well where panel supply gets quite tight, and then you throw in a couple of people going bust as well as a risk. We may see that component costs actually go up, and that certainly TV prices go up and CE prices in general go up as a result. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. And as you say, risk and uncertainty are just going to be part of everyday life from now on.
Well, it's definitely food for thought. And if you feel like we haven't asked a question that you had on your mind, listening to Paul there, do drop your questions into the comments section below this podcast, either on YouTube or on AVForums. And I'm sure Paul will be very happy to answer those questions, maybe in a few weeks' time, once we have a better picture of what's going on, and we can maybe come back and have a look at this sector of the market. But I mean, it's an area of the industry that we all have an interest in, and we've never seen anything like this before. So it is going to be maybe not depressing, Ed, but really interesting to see just how things do progress. And
yeah, you know the proverb, may you live in interesting times. I dislike interesting, I dislike complexity.
Yeah. Well, we're going to come back to it, and because there's not a lot else to talk about at the minute, but we will come back to it. We'll find out what's happening, because it is a strange time. Myself and Steve are normally getting pretty excited at the minute because we've normally got new toys to play with, and to review and to get excited about, and none of that's happening at the minute. And it's, again, that's the initial problem that we have, Paul, at the minute. You know, how do manufacturers go about what they're doing, because everything is literally on hold. They had their marketing budgets all lined up, they had all their models lined up, you would have to suggest that there is some supply sitting around somewhere waiting to go. It's going to be interesting to see just how they do get that up and running again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the one thing that we know is that there's going to be some surprises along the way, because this is, as rightly said, this is incredibly complex, and you can't just work it all out in one go on a piece of paper. I can't work it all out. There will be surprises, and we'll wait and see what they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, so no reviews this week because obviously we've had the input from Paul there, and like I say, we'll come back to it in a few weeks' time. So when we do come back in a sec, we're going to be talking films. Right, film time, and we have a film review. Funnily enough, it's not at the cinema, so we're still talking about these previews, premiere rentals, or whatever the phrase is. Kaz, I can never get my tongue around it. But Spies in Disguise, it had a theatrical run, didn't it, in the country?
It did, yeah, at Christmas, I think. So it isn't far off what its normal release, I think, would have been, but it's still a little bit early, and it's coming out today as the podcast is airing, and I was pleasantly surprised. This is the one which, if you haven't seen it, the trailer is Will Smith playing a super cool spy, ingests some potion, turns him into a pigeon.
Spoilers?
No, not really.
I remember
Anyway,
now why I didn't want to see it the first time.
yeah, it looks in the trailers like that's the only gag. It's actually a lot of fun. I really, really was pleasantly surprised by this. Really enjoyed it. It's Will Smith and it's Tom Holland, and their banter is a little bit like Downey Jr. and Tom Holland as Iron Man and Spider-Man. Holland is, of course, quintessentially nerdy teen, nerdy naive teen, and Will Smith, super cool, super arrogant. They nail their parts, and it's very well done. And there's some superb pigeon humour. You'd have never thought of it, but they
not a category I've previously dug out.
There is,
okay.
yeah. Some of the best laughs come from dialogueless pigeons. And, yeah. I absolutely loved it.
Unheralded
Whole family
sequel
loved
to Dances
it.
with Wolves, dialogue with pigeon.
It's really, really good. It's one of those films which manages to enjoy being a bit of a spy film. It's Will Smith is James Bond, but at the same time enjoy sending up spy films. And I had a blast. It was really good. Very, very funny. A lot of really good laughs. And it's nice to see Will Smith not take himself too seriously. I mean, he obviously is when he's playing this super cool spy, but obviously gets taken down a peg or three when he gets turned into a pigeon, and he's got to try and still be super cool and very annoyed at the same time. I mean, he's clearly having a ball, and I miss that when he takes himself quite seriously sometimes, and it's nice to see him enjoying those roles, because that's how he came into the business. He came in with like Bad Boys, and even in Independence Day, he was full of one-liners. He's on refreshingly fun, not taking yourself seriously form, and I enjoyed it. Yeah.
Okay. And,
so I'd recommend that.
And where can we get this at the moment? Is this a disc release or is it just digital at the minute?
It's just digital at the moment, and I think the bad news is that we're not getting it in 4K when it does come out. So, people on lockdown, hunt it out. Might as well get it on digital unless you're going to import it. I have a feeling there's a 4K US release, but that's a whole lot of hassle to go through for something which I'm pretty sure you can get on 4K on Apple, because they're very good that way. You go to Amazon and you pick it up in HD for $9.99 or $14.99, depending the price point. And you go to Apple and they'll give you the best possible quality they've got for the same price, and it's almost always 4K. So you can pick it up. I'm not naming preferences here. You can pick it up anywhere, and that's out today.
Okay, good stuff. And 4K releases.
Oh, it's the big ones, isn't it? It's the Star Wars Skywalker collection. Although I got to say again, the amount of times I've been disappointed whenever I reread that and see the word Skywalker in there, because where's my Rogue One? So it's
Rogue One getting released in this country?
No, so it's the 9. I'm not going to talk about this, Steve. It's
I've
the
got my copy from the
I'm
States.
not. That's why I'm not going to talk about it, Steve.
I've already got all the Star Wars films.
Yes.
So it's the best Star Wars film of recent years.
Yes, is not released in
right,
4K.
marvelous.
On the plus side, it means we're not getting Solo, but
Well, that's already available in 4K, isn't it?
oh yeah, you're right. It is just a downside then. I have ordered it. It is coming from the US, but yes. So this is the 9 films in the flawed, disjointed triple trilogy, which is coming out in a pretty box.
I'd want it to come in a full-size R2D2. It's the only way I'd
Well, for 200 quid, I was expecting a bit more than what you actually get, to be honest.
Yeah, I thought Liam Neeson was going to drop it round with a lightsaber. But
Come round with a kosh. If you don't buy this.
Yeah, and of course, Rise of Skywalker is also released tomorrow individually on 4K disc as well.
yes.
Hooray!
Sounds amazing. It's still a couple of stuff.
It's I've got my copy starting up tomorrow, so but it's just for the picture and sound, Steve. I've done a
my
Withers
3D copy arrives tomorrow.
3. You bought it twice. You hate it, but you've bought it twice.
Oh yeah, I've got plenty of films I hate that I've bought more than once.
This is exactly why they're encouraged to make more of them.
Yep.
Yeah, you're right. Actually,
I'm sorry. You are the problem.
But it
so
does
I'm
look
not
and
going to
sound
dress
great.
that up. I don't care if it looks or sounds good. I mean, Steve, we've reached the point where if someone marketed a colonoscopy in 8K, you'd buy it because it was in 8K.
Oh no, it'd have to be HDR.
Oh, that goes without saying.
Preferably Dolby Vision.
Dolby Vision, yeah.
Part of the standard, but nevertheless, it's not a substitute for it being. I mean, don't get me wrong. I need to point this out. The music industry has painfully learnt this lesson itself, that there's a finite limit to how many times people will buy Brothers in Arms just because they f***ed about with it again.
Yeah, you didn't live through the Laserdisc thing that me and Steve did. Ed, seriously, you would blow 60, 70 quid, right, on a Laserdisc on a film you've never seen just because it was being released on Laserdisc in the States and it hadn't had its cinema release in the UK yet. The number of turkeys I spent 60, 70, 80 quid.
You could wait 6 months for a cinema release in this country,
absolutely.
so it was worth doing because you were talking about a long time before it came to the cinema.
Yes,
Obviously,
okay, but most life forms, I mean, okay, on an evolutionary scale, we're still talking in the blink of an eye, but most people have learnt from their mistakes and adjusted to compensate. As I say, every time...
I know it's a form of insanity. I've been collecting Star Wars stuff since 1977. I've hated most of it since after 1980, and I admit that. I admit it. But I've got a collection. I wasn't going to not get it because then the collection wouldn't be complete. So clearly, I had to buy. I've also got the art of the Rise of Skywalker. I got the soundtrack. Which actually is the best thing about the film.
I've got to say, this is the first time, though, Steve, that they have released a Star Wars collection with everything on a format that I have absolutely no interest in buying it. No interest whatsoever.
It's an interesting journey, picture quality wise, because obviously the original films were shot in 35mm, but of course there are sequences in them that were not. That were where the effects were done, basically the special edition sequences which were done in '97 and then tweaked around since then. But I mean, they're still essentially the scenes that were done in '97 at less than 2K resolution. So those scenes stand out like a sore thumb.
Yeah.
The prequels, I mean, the first Phantom Menace was shot on 35mm, but it was an early DI, so it was essentially done at less than 2K. So that never looked good. And then, of course, Attack of the Clones was shot in 8-bit 1080p 24. So that's never going to look great. They'll do the best they can with it. Whereas obviously the three most recent ones look stunning. And Rogue One looks amazing and sounds amazing too. So that one's worth getting. But unfortunately, as Kaz just pointed out, currently going to have to.
It's not too expensive. I had a look on WoW HD.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you pay about the same in this country. So, as I say, it's a disc. If you like the film, and I do like that film, it looks
a good Star Wars film. A rare beast.
Yeah, it's worth getting. Most of the rest of the Skywalker collection, not so much.
I am looking forward to Rise of Skywalker, not for the film, Steve, but for the soundtrack.
Soundtrack's great
because it was amazing in the cinema, so I'm sure it's going to sound
typical Disney film. They turn up a little bit to get to full reference.
But, okay, yeah. So they do the opposite of DTS, don't they?
yeah. They don't hit the loudness button and turn up to 11 on everything.
Right, so that's 4K releases this week. Blu-ray, if you're still buying Blu-ray, Kaz, what can we buy?
You got Mr. Robot, the final season, Blue Story, Rio Grande, and They Live by Night. Yep.
Okay, thanks for that.
Actually, I just thought might as well mention, since it was announced this week, but Jaws, 2nd of June, I believe, in the States at least.
I mean, they had the most iconic piece of artwork ever for a film, and they don't use it as the cover for the disc.
I was so angry. It's like, why don't you just use the poster?
Yeah, I mean, it's terrible.
Honestly, that is bizarre, isn't it? You just sit there and think, what kind of marketing own goal are people trying to hit on that one? It is bizarre.
Companies are out trying to. Unfortunately, I suspect that we're going to see Zoom meeting phenomenon effects. But if you're talking about knock-on effects of this, some really strange things are going to make their way in terms of marketing across all categories, from food all the way to cars, from people making decentralized decisions, usually distracted by their own children.
You don't think that it's just as simple as people are being overly politically correct? So they're just removing the half-naked swimming woman.
Do you swim fully clothed?
No, I'm not saying that, Ed. And you know I'm not saying that.
Well, but I stress
it's
how
not you
earth...
swimming half-naked.
I don't think there's any agenda
given
like
that.
that.
A second thought, because
I just think it's incompetence on somebody in the marketing department.
They're always doing it, aren't they? It's like, why can't they just use the theatrical poster? Particularly when it's a classic one like Jaws, which is just an incredible piece of design.
Yeah. I think when it comes to artwork, they always mess it up. I get a lot of steelbooks. I like steelbooks, and they always pick the wrong art for steelbooks, or do it wrong, or crop it wrong. And whoever's making these decisions, I've no idea why it isn't simpler than that. They could just look at the end result.
I like steelbooks. They always choose the wrong art.
Yeah, I do. I like steelbooks because they don't have the ratings logos on. They don't have all of the crap that you normally get on the front cover of discs, and most of the time you get quite nicely done ones.
You can get Jaws with the classic artwork as a steelbook.
Yes,
but it's only available in Best Buy in the US.
Sure. Yes. Exactly. You have to go above and beyond to get some of them, but that's you don't want Blu-rays with all of the 15 ratings or whatever. It's not.
No, that's one of the reasons why I buy discs from the States half the time. I hate all that stuff clobbered all over it. But also,
don't want it. Yeah.
UK discs generally American discs look better. They tend to use the theatrical poster or something similar to it, whereas a lot of times in the UK, and I don't know whether it's just the UK or whether because it's aimed at the European market, but they'll just, if it's a Will Smith film, the box will just be a picture of Will Smith. It's like Route 1 advertising. Who's the star? Stick his face on it.
You do like that with rock films, though, don't you, Steve? It makes it much easier to get the job done.
You said Mr. Robot final season. Is there only 4 seasons of Mr. Robot?
Yes.
All right, I might give it another go then. I got halfway through season 2 and I gave up. But if there's only 4 seasons, I might just stick it out and see if it gets any better.
No, you should do it. It's tremendous. But it's not. You can't be doing a review at the same time.
All right. I'll take it.
I didn't say I was going to review it
anyway at the moment.
No, I don't mean that.
Statement.
You can't be doing something else at the same time. It's not do something else at the same time.
You've got to pay attention. All right.
That's what I mean. It's like it's very easy to put something on, and do something else at the same time, But Mr. Robot, you can't. Devs, the new series, we'll get onto that. You can't. So.
All right, okay, good stuff. So let's move over to TV and streaming releases. Normally there's one or two. We seem to have quite a list this week.
Yes, I think there was maybe a few lacking last week, but we have a whole bunch. We got the new Sky TV series Lincoln Rhyme: The Hunt for the Bone Collector, season 1. Who knows how that's going to go? I mean, they did the Denzel Washington, Angelina Jolie film, which I really enjoyed. But there's so many of these books, and the film killed the franchise in its tracks. Obviously, wasn't popular enough, and now they're doing a TV series. I don't know the stars enough to tell you who they are or what they've done before, so that may or may not work for it. But and the fact that Sky may or may not work for it. But it's interesting they're adapting the material, because I am a fan of the source books. I like the two characters, and Lincoln Rhyme and Amelia. Amelia Sachs, I'm going to say, but I'm sure I've got that muddled up with the person who discovered fossils. But yes, I really enjoy the books, so I hope they get it halfway right. Netflix's second original animated movie, that's The Willoughbys, coming out. That's after Claws, which, for those who haven't seen, is underrated first ditch by Netflix to do an original animated content. So they do a lot of original movies, but they've only just come into animation. And I'm very much looking forward to the new Ghost in the Shell 2045 season 1 is coming out on Netflix again.
Is that not live action?
No.
Animation.
So it's all been anime apart from the one Scarlett Johansson movie they made. But this is the first time they've done it full CG. So there's been a bit of backlash over, whether or not that stays true to the form that they've been using so far. It looks good. I'm looking forward to it. Netflix have got a pretty good track record for anime. Then we've got Gangs of London season 1, which I completely ignored and utterly overlooked, and then realised it was by Gareth Evans, The Raid, and watched the trailer, and lo and behold, it's not just Gangs of New York, it's Gangs of New York kicking the hell out of each other using an unprecedented amount of violence, and seriously well shot action sequences.
When does that start?
Brutal. I've got a feeling that's Friday, but you're going to make me pull up the dates now, aren't you?
That's your job.
Because I thought I might check that out, because, like you say, it's Gareth Evans.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, exactly.
Really violent.
It's 23rd.
Thursday.
So that's Thursday. There's
St. George's Day. I get to order a new phone.
It replaces War of the Worlds on.
How's that going?
It's finished. That was the last one. On Thursday.
How did it go? Is it worth what?
It was. It's completely unresolved. They've done the whole cliffhanger
I can't
thing.
be doing with that.
And you've got to wait to the next season now.
It
was okay, but it was just so slow.
I wonder if that's going to be another weird spin-off of the current situation, that television series might actually finish because you don't know if you're going to be allowed to make another one.
I just never stopped them from not finishing.
No, I suppose not.
Plenty of shows have not finished, unfortunately.
I'm trying to find some positives, all right?
I mean, Mindhunter, that was going so well, and then couldn't be asked. Fincher's doing something else, so we're not going to make any more.
Are they really not going to make any more?
Well, they've released the cast from their contracts.
Oh no!
Take a wild guess.
Absolutely pointless. Anyway, back onto this. There's Ricky Gervais is returning for Afterlife season 2. I thought the first season was tremendous, absolutely hilarious.
You know what? I've completely forgotten about that. I'll have to go and
proper
watch
good
that.
form. Yeah, you loved it.
You can watch it in 4 hours. It's basically like watching a long film.
Right.
It's got a scene in it where it made me laugh out loud and cry at the same time, which I didn't think was possible.
It's very funny and surprisingly touching and emotional. I mean, he absolutely nails it. Only thing I would say is that I really thought it was perfect just as is, and I'm tentatively hoping that they find a way to have a second season, legitimately have a second season, because it was note perfect. But yeah, that's coming back. And Apple TV's got Defending Jacob, which I only just added, and
yay!
It's
what?
It's their latest.
You did mention the Chris Hemsworth film.
Oh, have I missed Extraction, which I think has been renamed 3 times? Yes,
Let me guess,
I have.
he's a dentist.
Chris Hemsworth has come from Thor to
He needs to have a word with his agent. What's happened to his career?
Netflix. I mean, it sounds distinctly like a Bruce Willis straight-to-video movie. He's a fearless black market mercenary with nothing left to lose when his skills are solicited to rescue a kid from an imprisoned international crime lord.
Oh,
That sounds like Man on Fire.
It's it's something like that. If you watch the trailer, it could go either way. Most likely one way, considering it's Netflix. But might be all right.
I might watch it just for the awesome and utterly brazen levels of product placement it will no doubt have. I enjoy that very much.
Hey, the way things is going, it could be up for an Oscar.
No, I'm told you TikTok is going to win the Oscars.
Guys, they still have to have, at the moment, they haven't ruled, they still have to have a limited theatrical run.
They actually have to be run for a week in a cinema in New York and LA, and they have to have had reviews in the Washington Post and the LA Times, I think, is something like that.
If there's anything that's going to change that, let's face it, is the current situation.
Yes, the New York Times and the Washington Post. It's like those are the requirements to actually be up for the Oscars. So good luck there then.
So at the end of the month, they're going to sit down and discuss whether or not to change the rules, knowing full well that if they change them this year, just because next year everything's back to normal, I don't think they'll be able to go, well, actually, the films which we let get Oscars last year are no longer really eligible because the world's, so we'll see.
There also has to be a cinema, given that AMC is currently going bankrupt.
Yes. I mean, it's going to be interesting times on whether they just open the floodgates this year or whether they skip the Oscars for a year, which I think is probably more likely. Going back, Defending Jacob is the latest Apple TV show. It's Chris Evans and Michelle Doherty from...
Chris Evans, as in Captain America.
In Captain America, yeah.
Also needs to have a word with his agent, I think.
It wasn't going to be the disc jockey, was it?
All bets are off these days, Phil.
Who knows?
Apple TV have pretty good track cycle. They're not Netflix when it comes to quality. Primarily because they haven't got quantity. So yes. Netflix gets around it because they've got quantity. So by and large, almost every new Apple TV show is worth checking out. By and large, almost every new Netflix TV show is worth reading a review about first.
Apart from their documentaries. The documentaries are always good. I mean, I just watched the Innocence Files. That was excellent.
Yeah.
So worth checking out. I haven't seen it.
But this looks interesting. Family dealing with the accusation that their 14-year-old son may be a murderer. So happy times.
Sounds like a laugh a minute.
There's a whole bunch of stuff out on TV and streaming.
I wonder why. And Devs season 1 on BBC.
Oh, gotta talk about that. I mean, I nearly missed this. I've been looking forward to it for ages, but it got released obviously early in the States, and then the announcement of it coming to the BBC was very last minute. And
all the episodes are on iPlayer.
On iPlayer, or you can.
Oh, are they?
You can watch them once a week on actual TV. So it depends whether you want to binge it. I just go with binging it because it's tremendous. It's a slow burn. Not everyone's going to like it, but you have to afford it your time and your patience, and it utterly rewards it with a fantastic soundtrack, tremendous visuals.
Is it a single story?
It's one big story, yes.
I mean, it's not open-ended is what I mean. Not going to go wait for season 2.
I haven't crossed the last finish line on the episode yet.
Oh, God. Well, when you have, let me know.
I'm almost certain it is. I'm almost certain it's a package because loads of people haven't.
No, I was recording it. I recorded the 2 episodes that were on last week because I didn't realise it was on iPlayer in its entirety. I was going to just record it all and then watch it at the end. But
so far, it's been tied up very nicely. I'd recommend watching it. It's
well, I like Alex Garland.
Yes, and it's the best thing on TV at the moment. So,
Is MasterChef still on? I think Ed will have to fight you.
Finished on Friday.
And there's a new series of Forged in Fire starts on Thursday as well.
I can't watch that, but I mean, Car SOS, that hits me straight
Oh,
in the
yeah,
feels.
yeah,
Every
yeah.
time.
Ed, did you binge your way through the available episodes of Air Crash Investigation?
I got every single episode done. Yes.
Congratulations.
including one episode I actually pinged Phil about, where it has 8 people. I mean, you shouldn't jest about these things. 8 people died in the most Final Destination way you can. I mean, if you'd put it in a film, you'd have gone, yeah, that seems a bit gratuitous, but no, that's actually how 8 people died. You think, Christ almighty. Whenever you think that someone in film or television has plumbed the depths of imagination, actually it's happened for real. So, it's yeah, it was quite something. But unfortunately, there's no other series. They did this last season, and right now, obviously with television, I should be looking at all of these exciting things that Kaz just brought to our attention. But frankly, I can't be asked because Steve points out they're open-ended. I have to pay attention and all sorts of things that I'm just not willing to do.
You'd like Dev's, Ed. It's got great soundtrack. Really, really
can I
good
then just not
soundtrack.
find the Dev's soundtrack on a streaming
Oh,
service?
good luck. It's one of those shows where they dial everything out and just play the music while stuff is happening on screen.
Oh yeah, but in that case, that's a piece of piss because I can always find out what the music is.
Well, there you go. There's a challenge for you. Watch it.
It's
and
like
then try and find...
Silicon Valley. I mean, obviously, it's a great television series, but Silicon Valley had an amazing soundtrack. Everything that Mike Judge does and it was an entertaining afternoon picking through what the music was. The only time that really threw me was the first episode in one of the seasons where because Mike Judge is good mates with DJ Shadow, he managed to get hold of Nobody Speak, and it was the first time it had been played anywhere. Nobody knew what the hell it was, which was quite a challenge to work out where that had come from.
So you like Car Sausage, but do you like Wheeler Dealers?
I haven't got around to it. To be honest,
a new series starts this week
I
as
know,
well,
and it's on Now TV. I prefer Car SOS simply because we all need some joy in our lives, and Wheeler Dealers, obviously they've moved away from the commercial aspect of it over the years, trying to make a profit, hold out your hand and all the rest of it. But Car SOS, not everyone is as astonishingly heart-wrenching as everybody else, but nevertheless they do it in such a way that when these people have reunited with something which realistically 99% of them were never ever going to sort out themselves, just the emotional take on that is
there was one I watched a while ago. I think it was last season or maybe the season before that, the Lancia Delta Integrale, and he died halfway through.
He didn't make it. He's about the only one.
But that had me in pieces.
Did you see the one very recently, Phil, with the Lotus Esprit?
No, I haven't seen this season.
Thankfully, he got to see his. But there's one feature they dig out in restoring this Lotus Esprit, which, and I don't want to spoil it for you, it's an absolute game changer for classic cars and for people unlike me who actually own their cars. Because if the guy actually gets the stuff to market in a commercialised sense, people will be falling over themselves to have it.
Paul, do you watch much TV? Obviously, you're just on for the one episode. We normally do end of the month thing where we wrap up what we've been watching and what we've been enjoying and so on. So is there anything that you've been watching recently that you want to highlight?
Do you know what? That this is the first time in months that I've ended up sitting at home with the whole family around the TV. And I've got 2 teenage sons, and all of us are really enjoying going through Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Yes,
because it's just so much fun. We've just named the 2 fat pigeons in the garden, Hitchcock and Scully, and we've just got to really, really hurry up and finish season 6. Watching it again because season 7 I know is on demand on More 4, and we got 5 days before the first ones of those start disappearing.
Oh, so blimey!
We just love that one as a family, and we're and the in jokes and so on.
Raymond Holt is the greatest comic creation since what's his chops in Parks and Recreation. Obviously, as both a construct and the way that Andre Braga plays him. one of the greatest comic characters of the last 20 years, unquestionably.
Definitely very true. It's a comic piece of genius, that one, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, some of the lines, and just, I mean, how they are delivered deadpan is an endless source of wonderment to me. But yeah,
you like Parks and Recreation's head, and the star of Devs is
yes, I've checked, I've seen
Nicholas
it's Nick
Offerman.
Yes.
Yeah,
I'm sure that he's just zinging out one-liners in Devs. It strikes me as a laugh a minute. But nevertheless, I might give it a go if I stop listening to records and playing Gran Turismo. No promises, all right? Look, it's the equivalent of me going out. I drove around Belgium earlier today. That's the best that I could hope for.
Anything else, Paul?
That's actually been all of it because we're kind of busy at the moment. But no, that was my big one. I've also been going through a whole load of classic Hitchcock because they're just. You get 2 hours where you get drawn into that and you don't think about anything else. So Rear Window, and the best cinematic experience I ever had, which was watching a restored 65mm print of Vertigo. Don't have that on disc in the same quality, but those two you always get transformed by. But my teenage kids hate them. I sat them down in front of it, and at the end of it, I said, "What do you think of those?" And they went, "Meh." So there just weren't enough sharks and lasers.
I've got to say, I love Hitchcock. I've got most of the stuff in box sets and that liner, but I think there will be a 4K releases coming soon because they are on Sky in 4K at the moment.
Yeah, and of course it was interesting when you were talking about Star Wars earlier on. Because, of course, those 1960s ones shot on really, or even 50s, of course, for Rear Window, shot on really amazingly high-quality film stock. And then stuff made in the 70s and 80s, the film stock wasn't nearly as good. And we've kind of got this gap where you've got the old things can be restored and look amazing in UHD resolutions, and the later stuff just really doesn't. I'm really looking forward to those restorations. Do
you mind me asking, though, Paul, how old are you?
I'm in my early 50s. Just leave it like that.
Right, okay, that's fine. But there's a weird. I find I have a reticence here, and I may be alone in this. When we're dealing with films from 80s, 90s that I sort of watched near fresh, late 80s, early 90s especially, so on and so forth. In some regards, I'm happiest watching them as I remember them. I'm quite happy for The Wizard of Oz and these Hitchcock films to be released in all of their splendor. They're not part of my childhood. But actually, we've had this conversation before. Aliens, for me, I don't want it to be in super duper high definition. I want it to look kind of
never will. It was shot on the crappiest film we could find. At the time,
thankfully, I find that quite reassuring because that sort of that's kind of how I remember it. I quite like that.
It's an interesting one with the Star Wars where they used very analog production techniques, and the latest ones looked really analog again because they'd done real craft and not just thrown lots of CGI at it, and it had that nice feel like the proper Star Wars.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No, it's amazing what they can do with the digital cameras these days and make things look like film. It's almost harks back to the days of the old 70mm and so on. And there's been some cracking restorations. We're still waiting on Lawrence of Arabia, but it is coming, Steve.
It's coming on the 6th, yes, on the 2nd of June. But only, currently at least, only as part of a 6-disc box set.
It's a terrible. I thought it was actually 5. No, it's 6 films. It's
Gandhi, Lawrence of Arabia, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and Jerry Maguire.
What? League of
Their Own, and Dr. Strangelove. Now, to be fair, that's 6 good films. So, and I've only got 2 of them on Blu-ray.
I suppose I could use Jerry Maguire as a drinks coaster.
I know you don't like Jerry Maguire. But
it's one of the worst films.
I like Jerry Maguire, but
I like it.
I'm not entirely sure why you put all of those films together
it's weird.
in selection.
It's weird. But
I think it's a test to see if Withers will buy it.
I am.
That's not a very good test, really.
All right, it's a test to see if anyone other than With the Spies.
You know what'll happen though? You'll buy this box set, and then the week
it'll
after, it'll come out as a separate release, a single release. So
yeah.
Right. So let's wrap up the podcast then. We've been trying to keep it light-hearted at the end of the podcast without going down that many rabbit holes, but we're going to go down a rabbit hole. You see the link? Clever.
Tenuous.
Our favourite Keanu Reeves films and why are they our favourites? I think I can safely say that he's one of the best actors in Hollywood. There's just something about a Keanu Reeves film that appeals. It can be the cheesiest, it could be the worst script on the planet, or it could be a startling piece of sci-fi that we've never seen before, as in The Matrix. It just seems to, and he never ages. The guy's a vampire. He never seems to age either. So, Kaz, your favourite Keanu Reeves and why?
Oh, my favourite Keanu Reeves film and why? I'm going to go with John Wick. So I know Matrix changed everything for everyone, but there's a whole generation who know nothing about it, and that just frustrates the hell out of me. But John Wick reinvented Reeves after he disappeared into obscurity and was trudging straight to video and playing lots of gigs. And he came back and brought with him a fury in his precision kills and bone crunching violence. I really enjoyed it, and it taught me a little bit about him as well, because what he'd done was he'd taken all the money he made from the Matrix sequels, which he actually gave back to the stunts crew who worked on the Matrix sequels, and that same stunts crew he brought with him to make John Wick, and he funded it and made it from relative nothing. It was tentatively a straight to video-ish kind of project, and it turned into a massive massive release, hugely popular, spawned several sequels, a TV series which is hopefully still in the making, and it also showed just how much commitment he has, like a Tom Cruise level of commitment to his and I'm using the word commitment, not he is to be committed, to his art. I think he learnt new martial arts for it, and he, pushing 50, he went through a series of tremendous bone-crunching action movies. And we like things like Liam Neeson doing it for Taken, but Keanu Reeves and John Wick is where it's at. And I think it changed the action landscape again. When at a time when it was dying out, it brought it back to the fore. So I've got a lot of time for that and for those movies.
Yeah, I've got a lot of time for the John Wick movies. They're good gunplay, bit of fun, bit of uber violence that doesn't really mean much. And I love that universe as well. I think the universe is fantastic that's created there. Right, his worst film, Kaz, for you?
His worst film was probably the one where he was a serial killer. With James Spader was a detective and he was a serial killer. That's got to be up for one of his worst ones. I'm going to ask Steve to tell me what it's called, because I can't for the life of me remember.
Is that the Watcher?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I remember getting it and thinking he's just having a bad day. Why did he agree to do this? It wasn't convincing. James Spader can do the cop who's tormented by the losses he's endured, but Keanu Reeves can't be the killer. I mean, it just doesn't work. And for everything I like and admire about him, I like it when he also plays to his strengths, and his strength isn't playing a complex serial killer psychopath character. His strength is going on a vendetta and not saying a great deal doing it. And so that didn't work for me. And I've got to also say Chain Reaction's pretty bad, but almost so bad it's good.
Chain Reaction is watchably bad.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the effects make it a little bit more cheesy fun because they're so bad, like him driving away from like a nuclear explosion. It's almost worth watching for the badness it is, whereas The Watcher is just unwatchable.
Right. Okay, Paul, what's yours?
I'd always say that The Matrix, because it changed everything, and I think he was good in it, and he didn't, as you say, come out of the areas that he was comfortable in. So, and the aesthetic of that has endured. It also points out the whole of the rest of them, that they completely jumped the shark. The best movie he was in, I think, is Dangerous Liaisons. And the one that I kind of like and don't like all at the same time is Point Break. And I'm surprised nobody else has said this one, actually.
I was going to mention it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It is tremendous.
So, Point Break I like, with the exception of the fact it's got Patrick Swayze in it. But maybe that makes him look even better.
I don't know. I think the whole bromance between the two of them, I think that's what makes it work, really, that film.
Yeah.
So, good.
I would find Patrick Swayze annoying in anything. So, but anyway, I would. So those would be my three, and you can pick your scoring system appropriately.
Right. Well, seeing as you went for Point Break, I'm going to say Speed, because I think I think it's just a tight little action film. It introduced us to the lovely Miss Bullock as well. That was her first role, wasn't it? So
it wasn't
first major role.
Demolition Man.
Yeah.
No, Demolition Man the year before was probably.
Right, okay. Yeah, sorry, I'd forgotten about that. But anyway, Speed for me, if you want a nice tight actioner, and because I was going to say Point Break, but obviously Paul's picked up that one. And the worst thing of him acting, his worst acting ever, is in Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Oh, you weren't going for
worst film, slightly different. Yes, his worst acting is Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yep.
I was going to go for the Shakespeare Much Ado About Nothing, where he always looked all the way through as he was completely confused.
And
Like he wasn't on set. Like, what's going on?
Yeah, exactly. That was exactly. I don't know whether they just hit him on the back of the head with a plank every time before the camera rolled, but he just looked totally confused all the way through. Maybe he had his lines tattooed on the inside of his eyelids or something like that, but it was just really, it just looked really odd in that one.
Yeah, he's so much better now. He's a little bit older, and he doesn't do the I'm really dopey surfer boy thing. No, he just doesn't do it anymore. And so even in stuff where he's not called upon to break people's heads, he's still surprisingly competent.
Yeah, he was also terrible in Devil's Advocate as well. What a terrible film that was. Anyway, Ed.
Well, mine is also Speed. I mean, going back to the thread we had on the forums about best lift sequence, it's the opening of Speed. All else,
Speed. It is. I mean, Speed is a great.
The opening of Speed on its own is one of the greatest action sequences done in donkey's years. I mean, in many regards, less preposterous than the bloody bus stuff. But nevertheless, it's a great film. And Dennis Hopper chewing the scenery is always going to help Keanu along, because he doesn't really chew scenery, does our Keanu? I would give an honourable mention to a film I only watched by accident, which is A Scanner Darkly, which I quite like him in. But it sort of plays well to him looking confused.
Yeah, it's Philip K. Dick, isn't it?
And then the worst thing is actually there's two things to separate here, because he's no worse than anything else in it. But 47 Ronin, because one of these days a truly great 47 Ronin film will be made, but that wasn't it. It's just dog dirt.
It's a shame, really, because it's a really great story, but why they turned it
it's an amazing story. As I say, sooner or later a great film will be made of that story, but that is not it.
And finally, Steve.
I'm going to pick my favourite. Well, I'm not counting the ones you've already mentioned, obviously, but my favourite Keanu Reeves film, and again, it's with Sandra Bullock, is The Lake House.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Which I love. I love that film. I mean, it doesn't make a lick of sense, but if you just will need to suspend your disbelief and enjoy the film, it's fantastic. Even though they are never, I don't want to give away too much if you haven't seen the film, they're never in the same scene together.
Yeah.
they have such fantastic chemistry, as they proved in Speed, that they carry the film. And it's a lovely film. It's a lovely, sweet film, and he's great in it. And so I love The Lake House. And it's not an action film. It's a romantic science, I guess, a romantic fantasy is the best way of describing it, involving time travel. I will say no more than that. If you haven't seen The Lake House, check it out. I think it's a great film. Probably his worst film. I don't know. He's done some corkers, but Little Buddha was crap. Little Buddha was so bad they should make Bernardo Bertolucci give his Oscar back.
And honourable mentions are to Johnny Mnemonic, which is an extreme lesson in why predicting the future involving the internet is a bad idea.
Although he went from that to The Matrix, though, didn't he?
This is true. You know,
in fairness, the film was crap, but I think William Gibson's writing is a lot more prescient.
Yeah, maybe. I haven't watched it
but the film's awful. Yeah.
Hopefully, us mentioning Keanu Reeves in his films, if people are struggling for things to watch, we've maybe given them some ideas there to go and watch, even the awful ones, because we've got time on our hands at the minute, people. So if you have your favourite Keanu Reeves films we haven't mentioned here, and there's lots of them, he has been in. I've just been going through the list, and I was like,
56.
Really? Yeah, he's a vampire. He just does not age. Yeah.
There's a painting in his loft which is looking really shit.
Well, no, that's the thing, though, isn't it? Apparently, he's a really nice guy.
He is. Yeah.
He is. Yeah, and
so as I say, he gave his money to the stunt people to fund them on that. He did that whole project into film, and the reasons why we should preserve film.
Oh yeah, the documentary that was
he did
really good.
Side by side.
He was actually really good in it, and very, very kind to the people he was speaking to, and very thoughtful about the process. I mean, he comes across as a really nice guy, and he's had some horrendous
he's had
personal
tragedies.
Yeah, really, really has. So I got time for him.
Yeah, good stuff. So, like I say, if you've got favourite films we haven't mentioned there, or truly awful films, add them to the discussion underneath this podcast on YouTube or AVForums. But that's it for this week. My thanks to Ed Selley.
It seems to me the only thing you've learned is that Caesar is a salad dressing dude.
Kaz Harlow.
You're going to have to wait a second. I had it a second ago. Go to someone else first.
Steve Withers.
Gentlemen, we're history.
Kaz Harlow.
It is indeed a pleasure to introduce you to a gentleman we picked up in medieval Mongolia in the year 1269.
And Paul Gray.
He can't even cut us, dude.
And thank you, Paul, for joining us this week. It has been a pleasure. Don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Bookmark AVForums for latest reviews, news and video. Plus, why not leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes, but only if you enjoyed the show. Also, head over and check out our YouTube channel for videos of the latest reviews. And while you're there, feel free to subscribe. I'm Phil Hinton. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you again next week.